Hi guys, good morning. It's Tim Barnes here from Barnesviolins. We had a question on our YouTube channel asking why violins are so expensive. So I'm going to try to answer that question and give a little bit of information that I hope will be helpful when you're trying to decide how much to spend on an instrument and why, etc. Just things like that. So I'm going to talk about a few categories of violins in terms of price points, and I'm going to start with the least expensive. In the business here, we kind of jokingly call these VSO violins, and we refer to them as violin-shaped objects. They usually sell for less than $200. And again, I apologize, I'm referring a little bit to some of my notes here just to keep myself on track. But they're very inexpensive. They're almost exclusively internet instruments. And a few of their characteristics are, and why they're so inexpensive dash cheap, because they really are, they're not made from traditional woods. They don't use ebony for the fittings. They don't use real purfling. The wood is not carved, could be pressed, or plywood veneer, in fact. The instruments are usually not set up, so the bridges aren't cut. The strings sometimes are somewhat installed. The pegs have not been adjusted, fitted, etc., etc. There's very little quality control or standards in terms of the internal carving on these instruments. And we see these come to us because folks think sometimes they can save money by buying a violin this way. One, I highly do not recommend that you do this because when those come to me, and then when we have to make the adjustments to try to make it normal in terms of the bridge shape, the pegs functioning, sound post, most of the time you've spent more than you actually spent on the violin to begin with, and it's cheap already. So essentially the explanation for this is very cheap materials, and the violin-shaped object part goes with that. When you see it in the picture, essentially it looks like a violin, but truly it is not. Our next category is going to be what we describe as inexpensive student violins, and I'm going to give you a price range here that's roughly around $200 to $1,000. They're inexpensive. Usually they're going to be made with traditional woods now, and quality goes up a little bit in terms of the quality of wood, the varnish a bit. But again, this can be a good price point for students who are beginning, and that the violin functions well, everything is set up well, but you're moving up from these $200 violins in a way. Essentially it's quality of materials and quality of the manufacturing, how the instrument is put together. And when I say manufacturing, generally that is by people that do this, even though we use the term manufacturing. So now I'm going to talk about our next category of instruments, and these are what we would call more advanced violins, or just essentially advanced violins. And these can go anywhere from $1,000 on up to say $3,000, $2,500, $3,000, somewhere in there. And this is where we get into higher quality traditional woods. The quality of how the instrument is assembled is noticeably higher, and we can certainly point to these things when you come to our shop. The setup is usually getting better and better, and again, from our shop's perspective, now we start to get very involved with all these things, cutting the bridges, making sure the fingerboards are planed, etc., etc. So again, trying to keep this simple. There's the materials aspect, and then there's the amount of work that both the maker and or the violin shop puts into the instrument to raise the quality level. And what begins to happen at this point is that generally this is going to be for a more advanced player, and players now can start to discern and hear the difference in the sounds, in the voices, and discern also playability. How well does the instrument respond? Does it speak well? Does the instrument sound clear? Does it have a dark sound, a bright sound, etc., etc.? So in other words, players start to really formulate their own opinions about things. And that's a big difference from a beginner as far as being able to understand why then it makes sense to spend more money. So my next point, professional instruments, violins in particular at this point. And range can be really from around $3,000 to $15,000. More advanced students, getting to be professional, and sometimes even professionals, depending on if they find something that really is right up their street as far as the voice goes and playability, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes, from a professional standpoint, that this price point could be considered a little bit of too good to be true price. But for most people moving forward, it's a substantial amount of money and it's an investment. So you want to kind of understand why. So again, the materials, traditional woods, most of the time we're getting into just one luthier, one maker. We call these bench-made violins. When we get into bench-made instruments versus what we call manufactured instruments, the factory instruments. Factory instruments don't necessarily have anything to do with low quality or made by machines or anything like that. Essentially, in the world of violins, the term factory or manufactured instruments, for the most part, other than materials, refers to how the instrument is made. A factory instrument is assembled generally by many people in a workshop. So you'll, for example, have one person working on the tops of the violins. You'll have one person working on the ribs of the violins. You'll have one person working on the backs of the violins, a scroll person, et cetera, and then somebody at the end of the line who's assembling the various parts. A bench-made violin is when one maker, makes the entire violin from beginning to end, one person. And generally you're going to pay more money for a bench-made violin, not just because of the fact that it's gone through this more meticulous process by one person, but a lot of the time you're also paying for the reputation of the maker. With bench-made violins, when a maker makes a violin, estimated amount of time that goes into it is about 250 hours of labor. And again, you're not just talking about kind of your average person or whatnot. This is a highly skilled individual who's gone to school, who has studied, who has practiced their trade. And you pay more when you're dealing with somebody that's very skilled. Going on above the bench-made instruments, which is highly valued pieces of art, the greatest violins that are in existence now. Talk a little bit about Stradivarius, Guarnerius, Amati, Guadagnini. These are great Italian instruments, and these are also pieces of art. They're held in very high regard, and they have very big ticket prices attached to them. So these can go well into the millions of dollars for these instruments, again, because of what they are. It's who made it, and then you want to be very confident with who writes the certificates and the papers for these violins. But it's not just because the violins sound so amazing. A lot of the time they do, but this is a very important piece of art, and a lot of people are willing to spend a lot of money for these. It's the same way with art. With a Van Gogh or a Picasso, you're going to spend a lot more than you will for a wonderful artist who works down the street, maybe has beautiful paintings, but it won't be nearly the same price point. And it's the same with violins. I want to talk just a little bit about perspective in terms of buying violins in this particular video, relative to other things that we all spend a lot of money for without really thinking twice. And mainly this is for parents. Think about the cost of a good violin relative to certainly a car, which we all have to have, but let's think a little bit more about the practical things for students. Laptops, phones, iPads, all the technology that we all use and need to use, and we love these things, but let's remember the shelf life for these items. They don't usually last us more than 2, 3, 4, maybe maximum 5 years, and then we're buying another one, upgrading. With violins, it doesn't work that way, especially when you get to your final instrument. But say, for example, even along the way you purchase, you can still trade in for another instrument, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a process, and my opinion is these are wonderful low-tech machines that are tried and true. They've been working really, really well for 300 plus years, and they're marvelous. And I hope this may help explain a little bit why there are such a variety of prices. So I hope this has been a little bit helpful. I really appreciate the question, and if you guys have more questions about this, please let us know, and please like and subscribe our channel. Thank you so much. Have a great day.